Now for the analyzation of the news. They always make me say that. Based on what we were talking about last time, as you recall, some of you, I'm sure now, at least verbally, have perhaps an additional idea of how things overlap and how that the world of a real thinker is not one of mutual exclusivity. That news, if it makes any sense to you, speaking generically, if it makes any sense to you, if it seems important, it proves one thing. It proves that you're crazy. And instead of the news, I was just picking on the news since it's one of the most odious aspects of civilization. Well, in a nice sense, just in a friendly sense. One of the most useless, while apparently being of paramount importance. It's the same sort of thing as believing that any kind of information is going to be of supreme importance on the basis that it's exclusive, that the information is going to be worthwhile because it is, well, either true, moral, worthwhile, profitable, but it's got to be mutually exclusive to the point that it's not otherwise. And that is not how a man thinks, if he can think in a kind of a nonpartisan way. And the kind of examples I was using, the historical one about dividing up life into epochs and eras, like after Copernicus, man could no longer believe, after all those thousands of years, man could no longer believe he was the center of the universe. And I point out, and I'm sure all of you could hear it quite easily once you thought about it for a second, that you know damn well that there were people on this planet thousands of years ago, a few men somewhere, that had never believed that man, since they were the age of 2 or 3 minutes old and could think, they never had any idea that man was the center of the universe. To bring it a little more up to date, it's the same sort of thing, sort of, and in a like manner for any civilians who may have walked into the studio, that we're not discussing, and from last time, we're not actually discussing history or astronomy. The example I was about to pull out of a bit more contemporaneous has nothing to do with music or television, but it's been in literature, but I was just going to bring up in music. It's very common now that there's music going on, popular songs that seem to be of a striking psychological, or seem to contain striking psychological observations, social observations. It's very common now to hear that, maybe have a good beat and you can dance to it and all that. That's not but it will be, a young generation, and this is no commentary, as all of you people here know, other than civilians who walked in. It's no commentary on young generation going to hell, because they're not going to hell. It's always the older generation. If you think the younger generation is going to hell, whatever you could define the younger generation, it proves one thing: you're not part of it, and you're closer to hell than anybody. That is, you're dying just as fast as you can. But at any rate, every generation that, at least in fairly modern times, it seems to have any social impact, a new generation. This one is now describing, let me just get to it. There was a song that's being played now. Nice beat, and it comes on, and it's a certain kind of passion as a younger generation is supposed to have. Social commentators, and it's talking about, it's an attack on television. It's an attack on the mindlessness of how television, the shows, got no answer to my life. And if you're just listening along, the same sort of people that if you were a middle-class, educated person back in the 1500s when you heard about Copernicus' idea, and you went, well, I'll be. Man's not the center of the universe. And it sounds that's of some real importance. Then this sort of thing, if you listen a certain way, you have to nod along. When you hear that Copernicus made certain observations, and he can now prove, according to his data and observations, that man, the planet Earth, and thus man, is not the center of the universe, named the center of this solar system. And it sounds, well, that's important. And based upon what you heard, his observations, it sounds valid. Sounds to be of some importance. You hear somebody comment about, you hear the kind of the nasty attitude in the voice when the song starts about, things are not right. Turn on the TV, watch those shows, see what's going on. They pick the movies, but TV's it was just beautiful, better than the writer understood. But to point out, turn on those shows. Ain't no answer to my problems. And if you were just ordinary and listening along, let's assume just an ordinary person, you would have to nod like, well, that's true. Talk about a bunch of mindless crap and pulp. You know, TV, why don't we do something worthwhile? But think about it. Yeah. Damn old TV show. Ain't got no answer to my problems. There was a news item tonight that says that only those of sub-tar baby mentality will fight with tar babies. Or, if you get better, only unusually, which means perfunctory, uniform, dumb people will criticize men. And to think I start off saying that, based on last time, I was sure that it still has to do with cannibalism. It has to do with the way life is supposed to work, but one of the common forms of energy in which man is intellectually fueled is by a constant criticism, by a constant fault-finding, and I don't mean just in a mindless way. I don't mean just in some sophomoric manner. It can be in a highly structured academic setting amidst these social sciences. I hope I don't get to that news item, because you really don't like that one. It can be literate, academic, damn near scientific critiques of man. That is part of the fuel. There would be no world of academia if there was not a world of academic criticism. There'd be no world of fiction were there not critics of fiction. There would be no civilization of man were there no critics of man's civilization. You can look at the story of Adam and Eve, although it's hormonal if you look at it sexually, which is, of course, the packing material in which we were all shipped here in, for those of you that like that, neurally. So you cannot escape that, and of course anybody that wants to escape that, I wish you'd leave the room anyway. But beyond the physical of there being the two sexes of Adam and Eve and those kind of stories, considered also that one of them had to do something, like start civilization. And no one had to go, what in the hell have you done? Of course, I know that they got other stories and they can't really look right at it, but that's exactly what it is. For civilization to start, for Adam or Eve to step forward and do something, which was to make some move. As long as they talked when they did it, if they went, I'm going to step over here. That was the beginning of civilization. Or to use your kind of Western story, what is that interesting looking thing hanging on the tree? That was the beginning of civilization. But it didn't really get going. That wouldn't do. If that was it, there would be no story of Genesis. There would be no Christianity. There'd be no Old Testament. There'd be no civilization as we know it in this part of the world. If it had only been Eve or Adam went, ooh, look at that. Let me taste that. The end. If that was it, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't even know the story. So somebody had to do that. Then they had to be a critic. I know they doctored up that supposedly God or somebody went, hey, who been eating on my tree? And then, of course, that would have really made civilization there. That he was the critic. But since that appears to be extra systemic, then you have to go back to the Adam and Eve, that one person did one thing, which was the beginning of civilization. The beginning, the first step. But it wasn't actually operational until the other person went, what in the hell have you done? That is, Eve had to go, here, listen to my new concerto. You like that better than the apple? And Adam had to go, God, that's horrible. Or she had to go, ooh, look what I drew. And he went, you call that drawing? Or she had to go, listen to this poem. I wrote a love poem. There was a young man named Tucker. He went, oh, God, I hate limericks. It was only then that civilization was rolling. It is the energy. It is inescapable. There would only be someone unusually dumb who would criticize critics, which is what several of the news items were about tonight. But the kind of news items that we've been reading is not to criticize critics, because if you took away critics, you would take away one lung. You would take away one of the, if you notice there are two, make it non-physical instead of nouning it, we'll verbal it. if you took away the critics of everything, whether they call themselves critics or not, if you took away the critics, then as I'm sure some of you have probably noticed, or at least you probably read about back in high school, there are two distinct aspects to the process of, what do you call it? Breathing. And if you took away the critics, one stage of it would be missing. You could inhale all you wanted to. And of course, write if you live long enough to get to the post office. What seems to be criticism, and what seems to be, of course, sitting and fitting subjects for additional criticism, is criticism. What is politics? I mean, besides graft and being able to pinch a secretary, or what is politics? What is art? What is civilization? It is a self-consumption. It is a merry-go-round in which the only thing new is the addition of what appears to be new horses. It is a feeding of the children first. Each generation gets fed, and they get fed their ancestors, their parents, and everybody complains about it. And from any view, if someone criticizes whatever political party you're in, whatever neighborhood is your place of residence, whatever is your background, whoever attacks you and yours is a critic, as they're supposed to be. And of course, ill-founded in their criticism. But does it stop there? Not if civilization is going to stop, because not only do you take a certain amount of umbrage, feel yourself insulted to have a critic criticize your religion, your sex, your race, your nationality, people of your height, people in your profession, people who drive your kind of cars, people in your social class, people in your economic bracket, etc. Not only are they critics, but we cannot let it go at that. You know that. Not only are they critics, but why the hell don't they shut up? How come they can't wise up? Am I surrounded in life by dunderheads? Well, yes, certainly you are. If you're alive, they're doing half the breathing for you. I guess it was too subtle, wasn't it? Well, how about if I change the record, if I change the words to the point, see, it was serious. Maybe that was the problem, that it was too serious. There was a nice, young, somebody of the up-and-coming generation with a serious message. Well, sure, you could dance to it, but hell, there's nothing wrong with that. But the serious message, what the hell's going on here in life? Here I am in modern-day America, the cutting edge of Western society and civilization, and I turn on TV day and night. No matter when you turn it on, the kind of crap that's on television, it got no answer to the problems. The ecology, me being out of work, social injustice, economic injustice, and television got no answer. And the tacit part of the comment being that, they're supposed to, everybody expects it to. They do. You mean the people were shocked when they found out that this man, that funny name, Copernicus, has almost irrefutable proof that this planet's not the center of the universe? And we had whatever the population was back then, I don't know, 2 billion people staggering around this planet that heard about it, going, my God, I won't be able to sleep tonight. What a shock. And they all looked at each other and realized, to each other, do you realize that man will never be the same? And they all went, yeah. And see, that was about television. Well, how about a definition tonight? Expert. Who cows look to? Well, as dumb as I am, even I will finally give up. I give up. All right, we'll pretend to move on then. The writers in our writing department said that they've said this before, I'm sure some of you have been in the writing department, that it is very tricky and problematic to try and segue from one show to another. And I heard some of you ask them, from one show to another, and they finally relented and went, well, from one topic to another. Yeah. So you graduated from Wharton. That's with an H, though. You got to be sure and get the H in there. Okay. Well, I'll read this one. I don't care. I mean, if we've gone this far down. Here we go. It was a late report from this spring's intellectual roundup. Every time this one wrangler would pull out a head, just pull off out there by himself, off a little, and he'd look back over his shoulder, there was always a herd behind him. He finally realized it was his own sweet ass he was dragging along. Now, at least you can't say that we even attempted to segue from anything we've been talking about to this, because that is absolutely, obviously, totally unconnected. Those emotions unique to man must be given priority, leastwise amongst ordinary people. Let me rephrase this a little. I'm sure you get it, but how about, and it was also one that was connected tonight. Not connected, I wasn't going to say that. That Eve told Adam, or Adam told Eve, said, once you have named all the animals, you have also named all of our emotions. And he thought, is that anything like packing material? And she didn't know because she hadn't heard that other news item. But that's another story. Those emotions unique to man must be given priority, at least amongst non-unique people. Men believe, collectively, that their emotions are unique. And if you tried to get ordinary people, and you tried to wean them from the idea that emotions were unique and it was their intellect that was unique, men, as they're driven and made to do, would, shall we say, resist with some vigor. Even intellectuals, even those walking this planet that deserve at street level, by ordinary definitions, the term intellectual, the definition, that is, brains with bodies, as opposed to the crude being bodies with brains, they would still resist. If you tried to wean them, if you tried to separate their view of the idea that it is man's emotions that make him unique, and if you tried to tell just an ordinary intellectual, if you said, well, that's not actually so, that's misnamed, it's bleeding. For those of you that did not want to seek the Southeast Passage along with Lewis and Clark, that news item, I could tell, was real meaningful to most of you. At any rate, even if you told intellectuals, if you said what distinguishes man, it just bleeds over and it gets misnamed, not through any fault, because if you can understand it, if you grab the guy and you said, if you're listening, you see this, you'll see this, it's not actually misnamed, it's the only thing it could be named to ordinary views. And the guy goes, well, let lower my throat, damn it, and I'll try to say. And you go, all right, listen. Everyone thinks it's man's emotions. They'll say it's man's emotions that make him unique. His charity, his magnanimity. All of his human's emotions are what make man, by God, human. And the guy go, yeah. You say, but that's not really it. It's his mind. And a real intellectual, just at ordinary level, say, well, that's true. Because a man's not civilized, a man's not really a man, if he doesn't have some intellectual wherewithal and hopefully some education, in fact, some encouragement. You go, yeah. But you understand that that's all that is unique. What we call the human emotions are not unique. You cannot take a civilized, educated, intellectual man and separate him from that idea. You might push him a little bit and say, the intellectual life of man deserves even more weight than it's normally given, and the intellectual man might go, well, that's true. And if you really pushed it a little bit and talked a little more and you tried to push him more, like, well, it even deserves much more. He might go, yeah. And if you tried to finally trick him again and say, in fact, it deserves so much that it consumes the idea of man having unique emotions, then, if he's still sane, if you hadn't driven him nuts by then, he still have to straighten that back and go, no, too far. What is being civilized? In a non-pejorative sense, when I say civilized, of course, it is that the emotions that seem unique to man must be given priority. What else is being civilized? What else can you call it? At its most active manifestation, I guess it would be religion. It could even be the arts. That they seem to be praising, glorifying the human emotion, the good ones now. Because the civilized, of course, will say the baser, the emotions that they disapprove of, they'll say they do not really belong to man. That they are just simply holdovers. They are proof of some lingering genetic disposition of certain men to be uncivilized. Of course, then, if you were doing all this, you would want to jump back at his throat and say, well, you dumb son of a bitch, will you listen to yourself? And he'll go, no, I won't. Or he would think, well, I'd listen to myself before I would you. As he should. That an intellectual, civilized man will disclaim, just from whatever the ordinary view, well, like greed, anger, hostility, prejudice, just all forms of aggression. Men will say, educated men will say, that those are not unique human emotions. We have them in common with the beast. And so that is not what makes us unique. It is the unique human emotions that make us unique. Can they turn a phrase? Huh? But they must believe that. And what are these unique human emotions? What are the emotions unique to man? I'll tell you what they are. His brain thoughts. Those are not emotions. Well, don't argue with me. I'm the one running this. And you cannot get a man, an ordinary man, operating at his best intellectual level, to make that kind of distinction. He cannot. And thus, those emotions, unique to man, must be given priority. Men believe that they're running off, and they will even run the emotions without them being able to understand it. They will run them into the world that they describe as being purely intellectual, into the world of reason and logic, such as, well, it is illogical. It is unreasonable for a man to be greedy. It is illogical for a man to be physically aggressive. It's not just immoral, it's not just illegal to beat up your neighbor and take his goods. It's unprofitable. You got to be illogical because, and then they can quote the statistics of what the odds are of you being caught by committing a burglary in your neighborhood or by even shooting a stranger and trying to rob him. The odds are against you succeeding. Even if you do get away with it, he can show you proof that the average armed robbery on the street, the mugging, nets the mugger normally a gross profit of $12.72 on the average. And you're running the risk, as opposed to that, to getting 10 years in jail even if you only have to serve 7. And so he'll say, the emotion that runs that is illogical. It's unprofitable. And if you again tried to jump at him and put your little allegorical fingers around his little allegorical pencil neck throat and say, are you listening? And he'd say, well, certainly not. I'm sane. I'm not going to listen to this kind of babble. And thus it is that men have to continue to walk around believing that it is the human emotions that are unique to man that makes man unique, because it is always out of reach. He is still bad-mouthing. He is still attempting to dislocate himself from the past, which would be all animal-type emotions, all forms of hostility, and identifying himself with all forms of non-animal, as he calls it, such as charity, goodness, decency, just humanistic passions and behavior. And there is no such thing. It's simply the mind. And he'll get right to the verge of seeing it. That's why evidently I didn't make that clear, if it can be made clear, is he will even say, well, it's illogical. It's not just immoral to steal, it's illogical. A reasonable intellectual person would not steal, not under ordinary, he might. It's just illogical. And he cannot see that he is still talking about, on the basis, initially, of what appears to be, to the collective mind of man, a world of emotion, when it's not. That is back to the news item wherein Eve said to Adam, well, once you've named all the animals, you've named all of our emotions. Well, I should know that there's something about trying to use biblical humor, it never goes. I mean, it's not your fault, I should have known better. Well, I guess the materials are getting so old is part of it. Well, everything has a shelf life. I mean, how many people actually sit and read Shakespeare anymore? But then you start talking about something that was written thousands of years ago. Okay. Outside of routine genealogy, real thinkers have their own particular line of ancestry. If you can think, you are not eating your parents. They don't taste right. No offense. But you're not going to eat your parents. You're not going to eat the information that's already there. You're not going to fight tar babies. What's there to fight? Well, goddamn, it's a good thing that I can think for myself. Look at all the insanity. Look at all the historical garbage, the baggage that we've put up with up to this point. It's a good thing a man of my intellectual ilk has come along. Right. Cover that. If you can think, you don't eat your parents. If you can think, you are not fighting the past. There's nothing to fight. If you can think, you're not here to redress the intellectual wrongs of life. Dr. doing kind of dramatic piece of that, like, I am here to make the world safe from all tar babies. Where do I start? That's one thing about fighting tar babies. You do not have to look for an active opponent. You can close your eyes, go into a dark room and swing, and you'll hit one. The dark room, of course, being your brain. To hear something and go, my God, is the world gone mad? The man says he's going to cut the deficit by increasing taxes. Have I fallen behind Alice down the hole? Is Lewis Carroll back alive, running the political life of man? Am I surrounded by dunderheads? Yes. As long as you are mad about it, sure you are. And you can be a hermit and be surrounded by dunderheads. And I know we don't want to go into that because a reasonable man can go, and that's not possible. You can't go out and live by yourself and be surrounded by dunderheads. Then you do your own bit about it. Right. Okay. There was one item that I think, legend has it, since everybody likes a little Western Plains humor. Well, not necessarily humor, you be the judge of that. Legend has it that the philosophy of this one herd was either eat the grass or be ate by the grass. If you would change the herd to the collective intelligence of man real quick, and then of course get past that into yourself, but the basis of there you stand in life, the collective intelligence of man, and you either eat it, do away with it, to where you're not having to feed off your ancestors, the past. That the grass is here, you were born there on the grass. And if you don't either eat it, we're talking about eat it and that's it. Be done with it. If you don't do that, it's going to eat you. If you cannot consume, in the sense, not to eat it forever, but that is that you take a bite. You hear that somebody said that man is not the center of the universe. And you go, well, Jesus, I was 2 seconds behind. As soon as you hear it, you know, well, hell, I knew that. I just never thought about it. You mean people thought otherwise. You got to eat the grass, because if you don't, if you do not get past the intellectual environment in which you were born, it doesn't matter where you were born. If you don't eat it, it's going to eat you. If you don't see through it, it'll see through you. If you don't do it a big favor, it'll do you a big favor. That was a certain amount of sarcasm in that one, intellectual sarcasm, nonpartisan. If you don't see through it, all right, if you don't see through it, it'll run through you. If you don't eat the grass, it'll run through you. As people used to like to say, like, chicken liver sandwiches through a goose. For those of you that's ever held a goose in your lap while feeding it chopped liver or even small bites of pork chops. Seeing that there's no one in here with a white suit that looks a bit unusual, I assume that none of you have done that. And I guess we will conclude with one wrap-up news item. String provided under your seat. To prove the collective wrong. What a challenge.